you again.
Thank you very much. And Luke.
I think there's two questions here. There's what will we do locally and what will we do nationally. So the Liberal Democrats tomorrow are going to announce their manifesto, and in that we'll have a target to build 300,000 new homes every year, which is an increase over both of the other parties' commitments, and they're fully costed. We'll aim to build up to 10 new garden cities to provide houses across the country. In terms of locally, what can we do, what will I do to provide better social and affordable housing? And I think it's all down to ensuring that the councils start to implement their policies and they achieve their targets. I know that the Democrats in other boroughs in London have suggested that there are schemes where local residents could appeal against planning permission that's granted by the council if it doesn't meet the council's targets for social and affordable housing, and I think that's definitely something we could go down the route of. I think that it's in local residents' interests to be engaged in the process, as the Battersea Society enables by talking about the developments that are proposed and ensuring that there's proper scrutiny over developments and whether they're right for a local area, and more importantly, whether they're providing the sorts of level of both social and affordable housing that really is required. And I'd just like to talk about two statistics here. The Conservatives introduced right to buy without safeguards in place. There was a massive reduction in the available numbers of social housing when right to buy was introduced. Massive cuts. Okay, I'm talking about the Labour record now. Between 1997 and 2010, when Labour had the opportunity to make a difference, 421,000 fewer units were available in 2010 compared to 1997. So, whilst Labour have had the opportunity, they've not taken it. Liberal Democrats will be able to put in place nationwide house building programmes that provide the number required, which will feed down through the system, ensure that there are sufficient affordable and social houses available.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, that's obviously a crucial question. We've got some fairly reasonable answers. Clearly, a property, a house, a flat is not affordable. So it's a misnomer, we understand that. It's a bit of a farce to say affordable housing. So how do we afford to buy, how does a young couple of somebody starting off buying a mortgage, how do they afford it? Where do they buy it? UKIP will develop brownfield sites, we won't go into the green belt. But if we consider how the level of wages has been suppressed, I'm getting into areas now where I'm sure you've all considered it, but I'm sorry, I've got to say that because of the influx of migrant workers from overseas, from Europe, shall we say, they bring skills, and that's fine. We can measure those, as we've explained, through a control system, so the quality is raised. Because there are so many net migrants coming in, was it 300,000 last year, up from the 10 or 20,000 that the government said they would be aiming for.
So Chris, can I just pull you up a second? We're talking about housing at the moment.
Yeah, but I just make the point about salaries, how they're afforded, if I can develop the point.
Okay.
Because this seems to be tiptoed around. People are not earning enough. The minimum wage, following the Labour plan, will end up being the maximum wage. So people will never be able to afford a property. But if we develop our markets in the Commonwealth, the wider world, whose economies are growing about 7.5%, in Europe it's flatlined, that is where growth, that's where real money, new money will come from. And it's that approach that will raise salaries and make properties more affordable. That's the point I was making.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there members of the audience who would like to come back about anything housing related? Gentleman sitting at the front here.
The microphone.
There's a microphone just coming, so we've only got one, I'm afraid, so we have to be speedy.
Can I shout? Very loud. Very loud. I just wonder why
Please wait, because people would like to hear the question.
And we have our audience listening at home, don't forget.
just a simple one. Am I on? It's taken a long time, hasn't it? We've had no mention of the right to buy of housing association property, and I'm quite surprised no one's mentioned it. Just how the hell is that going to help the housing crisis in Battersea?
In a related point, I think it expands on that a little bit more. I'd be interested to hear Jane's comments on how the Conservative manifesto today, which announced that councils will be forced to sell off their most valuable properties in order to raise funds for building additional properties, how that will affect Battersea, where the majority of the highest value Wandsworth council properties will be located, which will utterly decimate the ability for anyone to get into social housing in Battersea in particular, and how she feels that her Conservative colleagues have, well, torpedoed her chances here, really, I guess.
Jane, I think we have to, the challenge has been laid down.
Well, I mean, I don't agree with Luke's point. For anyone who's ever met somebody who bought their council house during the right to buy, the first phase of right to buy, it's hard to argue that it wasn't a transformative experience for those people. And for many families, it made an enormous difference to how they intergenerationally did as a family. Now, I think the mistake of the first wave of right to buy was that it wasn't, the money raised wasn't invested in replacement housing. And I think that's been acknowledged as a mistake. That's not the same in this instance. It's been made quite clear that money raised through this new wave of right to buy, as it has indeed been in right to buy properties sold during this government, that money will be reinvested and reinvested in more housing. So I think, as I say, I think it's a transformative policy. But I think the key thing is to learn the lesson for the first time around and make sure that the money raised is reinvested. I mean, there's a high degree of consensus on this and the need to do more. One thing I would say is that, you know, if you talk to people in Battersea, many of them as households, because of London wages, earn more as a household, that take them over thresholds of the amount that you can earn for, say, affordable housing. And therefore I return to my point that you need to drive supply at all levels of the market, rather than just focus exclusively on affordable.
Sorry, Jane, I'd just like to ask again. The only charity or housing association body that was able to provide a positive quote on the Conservative announcement today was one of those that was run by the wife of a Conservative MP. Can you just expand a little bit more on the impact of this particular policy on Battersea?
Sorry, it's not really debate format, so if we could perhaps...
Our referee is kicking in.
Yes, I very much would. The Green Party would abolish right to buy. We know that it can be very destructive. There are a lot of people in our society who cannot afford a mortgage, whose jobs aren't secure enough to keep them paying their mortgage when something terrible happens, the roof falls in, or roof repairs and so on. And what happens then is you default on your mortgage, and then you land up needing social housing. You land up in a bed and breakfast. Right to buy has really decimated our housing stock and caused our housing crisis. And the idea that the Tories are planning to even now bring right to buy into housing association properties is really frightening. You might say that you'll reinvest in housing, but you jolly well haven't, have you?
I think the round of applause answered your question more concisely than any of us, but let's just look at the communities around us. We've got one of the blocks here where one landlord owns more than 100 flats and is renting them out, being paid through by housing benefit, which costs the taxpayer over 20 billion a year. Clearly, right to buy hasn't worked around here. And if you look at the Donington Estate, which is a little bit further along Battersea Park Road, now it's become a cash buyer's market because people can't get mortgages on floors 3 and above of those developments. So instead, it's investors coming in with cash rather than the residents that are actually living there that are buying it. So it's not working here, and the idea of expanding that to housing association homes here in Battersea, I think would be very foolish.
Yes, it's difficult. I tend to agree with the Green Party candidate, but I will just say that UK its manifesto is being published tomorrow. So, rather than preempt all that, because I'm not privy to it, I'll leave it till tomorrow.
Okay, that was a very honest answer. Right, I think there was a comment at the back there on the left. Yep.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah. I had an interesting statistic on the radio just before we came, which was that as a result of the increase in the discount on right to buy, 15,000 plus homes have been sold, and the same conditions provided that they would reinvest in another 15,000 homes, and apparently only 3,400 have been provided. I just wondered how that would change under these current plans to sell the housing association homes.
Jane, would you like to?
Well, I mean, there's obviously we're going to look. There'll be consultations on the detail of this policy, but I return to my point that I do think right to buy had a transformational impact in the 1980s. There are more homes now being built with the proceeds of the more recent wave of right to buy, and that's the right thing to do. The government has invested in a big fund and has announced today that it would, the Conservatives would top up that fund for clearing brownfield sites to enable more house building. But I make the point again that what fundamentally this country needs is more housing supply in all parts of the market.